just record on my computer and we are good to go. So Mike, it's all yours.
Is my screen, can you see my screen? Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I prefer the in-person presentations, but man, this is kind of nice not having to go out in this cold weather on a night like tonight. So I just wander in from the other room, flip a switch, and now we're all here, which is great. I gave this presentation last year at about this time for the Kalamazoo area wild ones, and it just so happened that it was the night that that terrible ice storm hit, and so we lost connection a couple of times. So the talk was truncated, and so I never got around to wrapping it all up. So hopefully nothing like that happens tonight. All right, so yeah, I am going to be talking about.
You'll need to share your screen real quick.
Oh, let's see. I don't see how I do that here. Oops.
Yeah, you're still a co-host.
Oh. Okay, let me see here. Oh, here we go. Did that do it? No.
Not yet.
Hang on. I don't know. I lost that.
I know. We get it all set, then we have to screw it up.
Hey, Michelle. Share screen. Desktop. Here we go. Okay, I think this will work.
And we've got it.
Okay. Is it the full screen now? Okay. All right. Good to go. Great. Always something with these. Okay. So, where was I now? All right, so I'm going to be talking about one particular garden. It's what you're looking at right here. This is my garden when I lived in Chicago. I started the garden in 2005, and I moved to Kalamazoo in 2020. So I've had 15 years with the same garden, and at times it was successful, and other times it wasn't, and then it was back to being successful. So a lot of that had to do with some of my processes, and a lot of it had to do with mistakes I made. So I decided I would put something together to inform people of some mistakes that you can avoid. Although I do think that learning through failure is kind of a good thing, but there are just some dumb mistakes that I wouldn't wish upon anyone. And because they'll haunt you for many, many years. And some of the mistakes I made still up until 15 years when we sold the house and left were still haunting me. So that's what we're talking about today. This garden is in Chicago with the conditions were kind of like the soil conditions in Chicago are kind of the opposite of what I deal with here in Kalamazoo. In Kalamazoo, it's pretty sandy, lean soil that drains really quickly. And in Chicago, it's the opposite. It is kind of sludgy. It's very rich. Plants grow very quickly and very tall, but so do weeds. And it doesn't drain really well because there's a clay component. So I'm kind of working with a different plant palette than I was in Chicago. All right, that's me in 2010, 5 years after I started the garden. That's my son, who's a year and a half in that picture. Now he's in high school, and sometimes he helps me with some dropseed projects while he's off in summer. So that's pretty wild, actually, I think. I don't know how there we go. Okay, on the right there is my wife mowing the lawn for the first time shortly after we moved into the house. So this area that is where she's at is the part of the yard that I'm gonna talk about today. I turned it into kind of a prairie, a very short prairie. Well, a small prairie with very tall plants, but it looks like, there's no way you could do that with those trees, but those trees did not last long. Shortly after we moved in, we lost those catalpa trees to storm damage, so they had to be removed, which was a bummer. But then we had all this sunlight, and we went to a Wild Ones meeting at our local Chicago chapter, where we learned about native plant gardening, and then we got all enthusiastic and motivated. And that was in the winter of I think that was in 2004, and then the plan was to create a garden in spring of 2005. We did not know what we were doing at all, had no idea. And back then there wasn't too much information that like how it is now, there's so much more available now. So there was a lot of trial and error, to say the least. So this yard is kind of a typical yard that you see all across America, especially in older neighborhoods where you'll have some really nice mature canopy trees. In Kalamazoo, we have beautiful old oaks in most people's yards. And I think a lot of those, those are nice clues to what the area was like pre-settlement. So those are remnant species. Unfortunately, that's about the only remnant that you'll find in a neighborhood, for the most part. But then because the understory is just completely vanished from what it previously was. So the problem with that is that you have this understory that's pretty vacant. There's not much going on there for biodiversity, and we decided we're gonna do something about that. I've never really been into gardening. To be honest, I kind of dislike very formal, gaudy gardens. Sorry to say that in a gardening club, but I've never really had any interest in any of that. But once I found out that there was kind of an environmental component to it, where and all these other things were interconnected, I got really enthusiastic, and I thought this could be a really cool thing that I could get into. And so I kind of dove in, and the obsession started then. So back then, we didn't really have any garden goals. We just wanted to put plants in there and see what happens. So I'm kind of going in a time machine back in time to 2005, and I'm giving myself some garden goals, because I think it's important before you start a garden to do a little bit of research, learn a little bit about the plants, do a little reading, maybe find out about what your area used to be like pre-settlement, and then you could perhaps go visit some remnant places, if it's a savanna or a prairie. I mean, unfortunately, there aren't a ton left, but there's a few here and there. And it's really interesting to go back and take a look at some of those, and you'll get really inspired, and it'll give you an idea of what you can work with. Even though you're still gardening, it's still somewhat of a restoration process. It's garden ecology. It's not horticulture. So this is what I think. So I'm thinking about what I'm gonna do now. I'm gonna redesign this garden. And so what would my goals be? Increase biodiversity. This understory, like I mentioned, is pretty blank. There's not much here for wildlife. Maybe a robin could eke out a worm or two, but that's about it. So I want to change that. Increase biodiversity, increase bird and pollinator habitat, reduce noise and pollution, and sequester carbon. Now, this is something very specific for this site, because this road back here is Kedzie Avenue, and we lived on the northwest side of Chicago, and this street was a very busy street, especially during rush hour. So the cars would back up, and so it would smell, it'd be loud, noisy, it's not very safe. That was one of our first goals that we knew we wanted to do, is to somehow screen that street from our yard. Oh, I should also mention, the only thing that's a little different than a typical city lot is that Our house is different that because we're set back on the lot. So we had a front yard. We didn't have a backyard. So all of our gardening is in the front yard. So anyways, we like to sit back by the house, have a little patio, and there's really nice shade under 3 more catalpa trees. There's a lot of catalpa trees on this property. And we wanted to sit back there in peace and quiet and not have to look, to have to see or smell or hear that road. So that was one garden goal. Conserve water, reduce stormwater runoff, which is very important in Chicago because their drain systems are very antiquated, and during heavy rainstorms, the water would back up sometimes into people's basements. So it was really kind of nasty, and the city had an incentive program for a while there. I don't know if they're doing it anymore, where they're trying to get homeowners to create rain gardens and native plant gardens. And it just happened at the time that we were creating these gardens. And so we took advantage of that. It was really nice. You'd buy some native plants, save the receipt, send it to the Department of Sustainability, and they'd send you a check. It was really great. I don't know if they do that anymore. Improve soil quality, reduce yard maintenance, create a self-sustaining, resilient plant community, create a beautiful, interesting yard, be a positive ambassador for the native garden movement, make it fabulous and simple enough so future owners don't destroy it. These last 3 bullet points are more about aesthetics, and it's something I think about with every project I start, because I just worry that, we put a lot of effort and time and money into these gardens, and, when it comes time for us to move out, how long you're going to stay in this house, 5, 10 years. And I think that's about the average these days. What's going to happen to that garden? So my goal when I started this business was like, I want to make these gardens, ecologically very functional, but also really beautiful. And to the point where, they're not going to be removed. They're not going to be considered an eyesore. In fact, when you sell that house, it's going to be an asset. And that's what this garden was when we sold our house in Chicago. A lot of people were excited about the garden. So that was very encouraging. And that's what I think about for every yard that I do. And also, you really want to make the maintenance schedule for these pretty easy. So there's a few tricks and strategies to do that. I did not do that for this yard, and we'll talk about that, but there's ways to make it self-sustainable, so it's not going to be a burden on anyone. Okay, so how am I doing with with accomplishing these goals? It looks pretty good. On the left here is a photo of our house shortly before we moved in. The for sale signs are nailed to those catalpa trees, and those are the 2 catalpa trees that we lost in the storm. And then on the right, this is only 3 years later. It really took off. Like I said, plants grow very quickly with this kind of soil. I'm kind of dismayed sometimes at the projects I do here in Kalamazoo, because it seems to take twice as long for a garden to get established as it did in Chicago, and it just has to do with the soil structure. It'll eventually catch up, and it has. But anyway, so I think it's looking pretty good. I think I'm accomplishing a lot of these goals here, both ecologically and aesthetically. However, there's one invisible goal that is lacking, that you don't see behind the scenes, is the maintenance. There's excessive weeding. I'm staking a lot of these plants. I'm fencing them up to hold them up. I'm mulching way too frequently, transplanting, removing, etc. So what's up with all this maintenance hours? I was told native gardens were easy. Well, they are if you do it correctly, and I did not do it correctly early on. I had there was a lot of errors, and I'm going to talk about the 3 errors that I made. The preparation stage, the design, my design errors, and then how I continued to maintain this garden. Made a lot of mistakes in that realm as well. Okay, let's start with the prep errors. It's important to get the garden started on the right foot. Like I said, back then there wasn't too much information on how to do these gardens. So we kind of defaulted to what we could find, any sort of gardening books from the library. And so it's just a lot of those conventional, traditional gardening books. And most of them say, you got to dig up the lawn, get rid of that. And the easiest way to do that is rototill. So we borrowed my wife's dad's rototill, and we just chopped the heck out of that lawn and really tore it up. And it worked. It's not easy work, but it was ready to go right away. The problem with that is that we violently disturb the soil. I know now, I didn't know then, that soil disturbance is going to be your number one problem. So you're going to want to minimize soil disturbance as much as possible. Excuse me. And then also these gardening books will talk about good and bad soil, quote unquote. And that I've learned since then that there's really no such thing as good or bad soil. It's just different. Maybe if you're working with an edible vegetable gardens, yeah, you rototill, you add amendments, you want a really rich soil. But with this kind of gardening, if you do that, you're just basically creating a weed farm, because what really loves rich soils are weeds. And they find it really quickly. I found it's impressive how quick they get in there and get a hold and start rooting in. So that's what we did. We added some sort of compost. I have no idea what it was. What are some bags we bought from the local nursery? Rototilled that in. I mean, we didn't have to do any of this. The soil in Chicago is already very rich. It wasn't compacted. There was no problems with it. And now we just created even, a very rich soil that's just going to be very attractive to weeds. From there, oh, I should also mention, I never amend soil. I've done almost about 100 gardens so far. And not once have I had felt like I needed to amend the soil. For every type of soil, there's a natural community, and that natural community has a very long plant list. So there's many possibilities. There's not one size fits all for soil when it comes to, especially when it comes to garden ecologically, native plant garden designs. Okay, the next problem we faced was, we didn't know anything about plants. We found out that Possibility Place was having a pop-up sale on Mother's Day. So we went there and we showed up. I think we slept in too late. So we just ended up buying whatever was left. We looked at the pictures and, the sample photos of these flowers in bloom. Like, that looks pretty cool. So we put those, we had no plan whatsoever. And because of that, we are kind of conservative. So we just planted sparsely. So if you see here, this is a year after we planted. There's a lot of space in between these plants, like 3 feet of space. And that is something you frequently see in conventional traditional gardening, especially in commercial landscapes. You'll see this sea of mulch with islands of plants. And that's very common. Unfortunately, that's something we want to get away from when we're thinking about gardens ecologically. This is ecology, this isn't horticulture. And in ecology, we're looking to natural systems, their communities. And how do these communities function? Well, there's very intricate, complicated relationships between the plants and the soils, between all sorts of abiotic and biotic, all sorts of influences there, and the fauna, of course. So we want these plants as close together because they need to interact, they need to form a community, and you want them to do this because it's gonna cut back on your maintenance, because that's how it will reach a point of self-sustainable process, when it can function on its own and it can work together as a community rather than as separate specimens. That's conventional gardening, conventional horticulture, is all about these specimens, and they treat each plant separately. But we want to get to the point where we treat, if you're thinking about maintenance, you think of the entire community, not individual plants. Okay, I'm spending a lot of time on prep airs because it's enormous. You want to get it started right from the beginning. Excessive irrigation is another mistake we made. We put these drip lines in here, and I don't know, we just let them go for hours, a few times a week. We didn't know what we were doing. Basically, we were wasting water, and we were feeding weeds. So I see this. This is a common error. In fact, I see the extremes of irrigation. I have some customers who will get really excited and water, every other day or sometimes every day, because they think that that's going to get the garden growing faster and more lush. But you don't want to do that, especially if you're working with plants that love dry situations. That will definitely rot them out, and you will lose them. And then you got the other extreme where people think, oh, well, it's native plants. They don't need water, right? Well, eventually they don't need water after a year or two, once they get established. But to get them established, you need to irrigate. So let's find the middle way for irrigation. Okay, so excessively enriched soil and sparse plantings create monster plants that flop. So this is the problem you see on the left here. A lot of these plants are growing way too tall, and they're flopping over. They're flopping over into the sidewalk. They're flopping over into my driveway. I have a really cool path that I put a lot of effort into maintaining, but it doesn't matter because I've lost it to all these flopping asters and goldenrods, and even the little blue stem is flopping. I've never seen little blue stem flop in a native system, in its native natural habitat. But here, because for one, I enriched the soil too much, it's too rich, overwatered the plants. The other problem is, well, for one, there's sparse plantings, so there's no support for these plants. And for a long time, when I heard about that, when they say, how do I deal with flopping plants? They're like, oh, what you need are some grasses to hold them up. I'm like, okay, I guess so. That doesn't make sense. But I was imagining that like little blue stem is kind of serving as some sort of support above ground to hold these plants up. And I'm like, that doesn't seem like that will really work. Whoa, there's a cat here. Get out of here. But what I've learned recently, the support is what happens underground. And the reason why you want a lot of sedges and grasses in your plantings is because they have very beautiful fibrous root systems, and these fibrous root systems are going to be they're going to be the support that the tall flowering plants need to stand up straight. So if you're ever in a prairie with these similar plants, you got New England aster, sky blue aster, they're flopping over here. You're not going to see them flop, maybe after a heavy rainstorm, but then they perk right back up. The reason why they're standing up straight and not so tall is because they got support underground by fibrous root systems from graminoids. That's grasses, sedges, rushes. All right, and this picture on the right, this is the last photo I took of our garden shortly before we left to move to Kalamazoo. So this is my son being swallowed up by enormous prairie dock leaf. So prairie dock does have really large leaves, but this looks cartoonish. It looks like I photoshopped and blew it up, but no, that's the problem. You know, even after 15 years, I'm still haunted by what I did at the prep phase by adding that amendment and not having enough ground base cover, and who knows what else, probably a way too much watering. So let's see. Okay. I'm losing my thing here. So before I get into the problems I made with the design phase, is I want to talk about design quickly and about the fundamentals of design, because this is something that I feel like many people don't know about. And it's not like you have to get really nerdy about design, but a basic knowledge of it when you're creating a garden is kind of important, because it's going to help with the overall structure of the garden, and it's going to help with the sustainability of that garden. So there are vertical and there are temporal layers to design. And the most important layer is the ground cover base layer. And approximately 50% of your plant list should be from this layer. Now, if you go to, if you look at a lot of native plant gardens, or you know, just pop in at you know, if a local school has a pollinator garden, the chances are that ground cover base layer is going to be non-existent. I would say probably 10, you know, most native plant gardens, they have about 10% of their plant list is devoted to the base layer. It's very important to get a good base layer. They are low growing plants that function as, oh, I need to get this out of my way. There we go. As living mulch, and provide root support for taller plants, control erosion, build soil, and suppress weeds. So basically, the base layer is the workhorse of the garden. It's not the sexy plants that have, you're not gonna see photos of these all over Instagram, because they're very subtle. They're, you know, in a lot of cases, they're mostly, I like to use sedges when it's possible, because there are a lot of sedges that you could get that are that grow very short. So they're going to occupy that space. The other cool thing about sedges is that they're cool seasons. So they're going to occupy that space early on in the spring, which is getting to be really important now because of climate change. And our springs are happening so early. So the weeds have got a head start on the growing season. So if you get some sedges in there, they're going to occupy that ground cover. And you can use cool season grasses as well, or rushes work well, like path rush, but you want it to be pretty short. Warm season grasses work well as long as they're short, and even lateral spreading forbs like wild strawberry or ragwort work well for the ground cover base layer. For warm season grasses, my favorite is prairie dropseed. It's just an outstanding grass that serves a couple of functions. It provides the base layer, but it also is just very elegant, especially later in the season, and then in the winter time, it has beautiful winter structure as well. Okay, the next layer is the seasonal layer. This is the sexy layer. This is the layer that everyone is very familiar with. In a lot of gardens, it's about 90 to 100% of the plant list, but really it should be only about 25 to 40%. These are mid-height, seasonally flowering plants arranged in clumps, masses, or drifts, successionally blooming throughout the growing season. And then there's a structural layer, which is not very well known. This is kind of, I think of this layer as kind of like the skyline of a garden. So if you back up and you'll see it's kind of, I like to space the structural layer and place them strategically so it looks like a skyline. So these are large plants, grasses, although be careful with tall grasses in small yards because those babies reseed crazy. Shrubs and or trees that form the visual architectural structure of the garden. Plants in this layer are long-lived, have distinct silhouette forms, even during the winter. So even in the winter, you should still, if you, or even before the winter, like if you take a photo of your garden and you flip the switch on your phone to black and white, the garden should still look interesting, even without the color. And that's because this is the structure. The structures, you want to choose plants that have a very interesting structure. They're very firm and aren't going to topple over easily. Good examples for a structural layer plants would be Joe Pye weed sometimes, although they can get a little crazy. Rattlesnake master, I use that one a lot for structure. Silphiums are great, especially prairie dock, and compass plant can work well as long as the soil isn't too rich, and you have to make sure you have a lot of the graminoid structure for them because they will flop as well. Let's see, tall grasses, maybe not. Culver's root, gorgeous plant to clump and space out throughout the garden. Wild quinine is an amazing one. It blooms for over 100 days. So that is something to think about. Really fantastic plant. I like to mass those together. And tall coreopsis can work as well. Okay, filler plants. This is something I add at the end of planting all the other layers. I kind of sprinkle in filler plants in spots where it's kind of where it's empty, but also in areas where I've planted species that are very long-lived, that take a long time to get established, like the Baptisias. Are notorious for taking their sweet time of filling in. Same with something like lead plant, which I absolutely love that plant. I use it a lot, but it's going to be a few years before that thing is full. So what I like to do is fill these gaps with short-lived plants that are going to occupy that space quickly. But by the time that these other long-lived plants are starting to take hold, these short-lived species are just going to kind of disappear. So these plants grow quickly, filling in bare spots during the early developmental stage of the garden and die off when longer-lived species take off. A few examples would be dotted horsemint, which is Monarda punctata, landsleaf coreopsis, columbine, cardinal flower if it's kind of a wet situation or rich situation. Black-eyed Susans can work. Why did that do that? There we go. Okay. So this is a year after I planted the garden. How am I doing with the design layers? Well, let's start with the base layer. Not so good. See all this brown, all that mulch, and this is very common. Most of the time, the base layer in these gardens is mulch, and mulch is fine to get the garden started. I use a 2-inch layer of hardwood shredded mulch, but then I never replenish after that. So if you don't have a base layer with graminoids, your base layer is going to be the mulch. And so you have to keep replenishing mulch, which is a pain in the butt because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of money. The problem with mulch is that it holds moisture, but not in the way that the fibrous root systems hold moisture. They're holding the moisture underground, which is where you want that. But the mulch is holding the moisture at the surface level. The problem with that is it will rot out the crowns of a lot of plants. So go easy on the mulch. There's a chaotic seasonal layer. What I mean by that is most of the blooming excitement for this garden happens in July and goes into October. it's a pretty long time, but what's going on in April, May, and June? Well, it looks like a vacant lot with some mulch and some steppers here. So I'm missing out on some early successional blooms. Clash of communities, I'll talk about this later, but basically you want to put the right plant in the right spot. So if the conditions aren't correct for that plant, then pass on that plant. You want get to know your soil. I don't do soil. I never test my soil. I basically take my auger drill and drill into the soil and pull it up and kind of inspect it from there. If it crumbles quickly, that I know that it's pretty lean soil, it's going to drain well. If the soil kind of clings to the auger, I know that it's thicker and not well drained. I know it's not very scientific, but I just kind of I just kind of use my instinct on something like that. Poor successional planning, meaning like I don't have any early successional plants in here that are going to occupy the space while some of these older, like these other plants are trying to root in. Improper plant siting, I'll talk about that later, but you could see right here, sky blue aster, New England aster right up front. They have no business being right up front in a front yard garden because yeah, I love asters, but you have to use them strategically, especially in a front yard, because for most of their growing season, they're kind of weedy looking, and then finally they explode in their blooms in September, or not even until October, and they're fantastic and they're ecologically super plants, but you want them to be kind of towards the back, and you want to be sparing with the use of them. It's a tricky plant to use in a small garden, especially in the front yard. Excuse me. Too many specimen species, not enough clumps and drifts. I think we've all been there where we go to a native plant sale and are blown away at the options and everything looks cool. So you get the collector's mindset. I still do that. I can't help myself. And I, just start adding one of this and one of that. And, the problem with that is, yeah, you'll have a lot of diversity, but it's all kind of gonna get lost anyways, especially if you have asters and goldenrods and you don't have a good base layer. Everything's gonna seed all over it, and you're just gonna be like, somewhere down in here, I got this really cool plant that is super rare. But yeah, and so you want to kind of simplify your plant list and give some harmony to it. That's the next part I want to talk about, is rhythm and harmony. Design like those pros do, where they have, drifts kind of repeating throughout the bed. And that's going to give the space some coherence and legibility. You want to be able to understand the landscape. If you look at it and it is kind of a mess to you, to your eye, you're gonna not really be attracted to it. It's psychology, really. Even if you can't articulate it, you'll know it when you see it. Okay, I nicked this diagram from a really fantastic book called Planting in a Post-Wild World. And I just love the way that it shows the ground cover layer underground specifically. These are graminoids, sedges, grasses, and rushes. And this is what they look like underground. This is fibrous root systems. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the support that these tall flowering plants need. So for example, this Joe Pye weed has this really long, root system. And if there weren't any these fibrous root systems here to hold them in place so the roots go down, what they do is they splay outwards like this, because they're like, wow, I got all this room, this feels good. The problem with that is then this plant has no support to hold up this very tall stalk with large flowers, it gets pretty heavy up there, so it's just gonna flop over. That's the reason it's flopping. Same with the echinacea, even these other tall grasses, right? So these babies are holding it all up. Get a good ground base layer. I like this quote too. The approach to ground cover is the single most important concept of creating a functioning plant community. Okay, this is what I was talking about earlier about plant communities, clashing plant communities. I don't remember when this photo was taken, but like I said earlier, sometimes this garden was successful and sometimes it wasn't. It would keep going back and forth. This is right when I took this photo, I would say this is successful. This is fantastic. Looks great. However, it's not going to last long because a lot of these plants should not be here. They should be in my garden in Kalamazoo, not in Chicago, because they are meant to live in dry soils that drain well. So for example, lance leaf coreopsis did not survive more than a year in this garden. Over here, it's hard to see, but it's a little edge of New Jersey tea, and it was the most beautiful formal mound of New Jersey tea that I've ever seen, and I was just in awe of this shrub for 2 years, and then it vanished. You know, they have a very deep taproot, so they live very long. So there's no reason why that, you know, if you have it in the right spot, it shouldn't live more than, it should be living 10 years, 15 maybe. But this guy disappeared because you know, the root system rotted. This soil is way too thick, too heavy. Same with Asclepias tuberosa, butterfly milkweed. That lived a little longer, maybe 3 years, and then it vanished. I was hell-bent on getting tuberosa in this garden because I absolutely love this plant. It's my favorite prairie plant. I just love the way that orange just pops no matter where it's at. It's just the perfect contrast. I sprinkle this now that I live in the appropriate conditions. I've got like 25 of these plants in my yard, and I sprinkle it around the garden because it's just it doesn't need to be masked. It's just on its own. It's just fantastic. But having it repeat throughout the garden, that's a really beautiful rhythm to have. We got June grass in here, lived about a year. Can't handle that soil. Even Cytotes grama only lasted a few years. It's just too heavy. What did do well is this Echinacea purpurea, because that can handle rich soils. But look at the other Echinacea, pallida, the pale purple coneflower, that did not last more than a year. The plants that did really well are plants that you find in rich soils. If you go to a remnant black soil prairie, there's a beautiful one in Northwest Indiana that I check out every summer. You'll find rattlesnake master. You'll find wild quinine in there. Oh, not wild quinine. What is that? Culver's root back there. What else? Tripteris, Coreopsis tripteris is back here. That does really well in this garden. Rudbeckia subtomentosa, which is, I think the common name is sweet brown-eyed Susan. That did amazing this yard. So did cut plant. So, you know, you just gotta, you use the plant that works best for the situation. Improper plant siting. This is a year and a half after I planted the garden, and look what happened with these asters. They went crazy. They reseeded because there was all this space for them because I didn't have a good graminoid base layer. They grew super tall because of the enriched soil, and they're flopping into the sidewalk. Now my garden is becoming a nuisance, right? Because look at, you know, for the first 3 months of the growing season, these guys kind of look weedy. Same with the sky blue aster. Get them out of here. I love asters again, like I mentioned before, but put them somewhere in the back and use them sparingly. They look fantastic in October, that's for sure. But that's where my path was. They totally consumed the path. Okay, the plants are too tall and lack height diversity. There's no rhythm happening here. It's not legible. It's not coherent. There's a lot of growth going on, but it's, it's just, I don't know, we can do better, right? So what you see here, it's probably hard to see, is I put a garden fence. I always had to put a small garden fence to hold these plants back from falling into the driveway, so I could park my car in here, because they're also falling into the driveway here. This is just a strip. It was just a strip of lawn when we moved in, and I planted this strip as well with tall plants, which was totally ridiculous. The subtomentosa, Rudbeckia subtomentosa is flopping in. I've got I had a false sunflower in there. I had rosin weed, this ridiculously tall Joe Pye weed. I mean, just a textbook example of what not to put in this tiny strip. They flopped into the driveway and they flopped into the sidewalk, and basically no one can get to my house. Poor pizza guy. So yeah, I'm not really happy with the way it's going. This garden is happening now. This is later on too, actually. And then let's get into the management errors. So I created this weed farm because of the enriched soils and the soil disturbance. And then I continued that vicious cycle by within my poor management practices. Every April and May, the weeds would grow crazy in this yard. And so what do? You pull them. So I pulled like crazy. And the weeds, they're just benign weeds. They're really just cool season lawn grasses, really. So I pull them out. Every time I pull out one of those lawn grasses, I'm just opening up a new wound to get infected with weeds. And that's what just happened over and over again. So instead, what I should have done is just clip those weeds. So the problem what I had is I pulled the weeds, and then I'm like, oh no, I've got all this empty space. Well, let's add some more mulch, of course. And then adding more mulch changes the components of the soil. When that decays, it's making the soil even more rich. So it's just a vicious cycle. Allowed too much leaf litter to pile up. So this is something we should talk about, because I see frequently every fall, the campaign Leave the Leaves, and I'm totally for this, but in moderation. One extreme is the crazy landscape crew that comes out with those blowers, and even they won't leave one leaf behind. And then the other extreme is just letting everything fall and just leaving it be. That's fine, but it depends on the tree. For these catalpa leaves, they're just so thick. And it's basically creating a really thick layer. It's doing a very similar thing as when we are trying to smother the lawn, like with cardboard, because to kill existing vegetation. So that thick leaf layer is killing the existing vegetation. And what's the existing vegetation in this situation? It's the plants you planted. So, again, middle way when it comes to leaf litter. Another thing that isn't talked about very often is too much snow shoveled into your beds, especially in a garden where the plants are young and they're just getting established. All that heavy moisture, if the soil doesn't drain well, is just contributes to the root rot. So be careful where you put the heavy wet snow and how much of it. Okay, moving along, June 2007, that's only 2 years after we planted. Things are growing, but I've got no coherency here. I lost my path. August 2009, whoa, look at the asters went crazy, no path. A little bit of rhythm here with the Rudbeckia, but it's getting to be a bit of a mess. I do want to say though, I don't want to be too hard on myself, because I think, what's the alternative? This is the alternative. This is bleak, right? This is not contributing anything ecologically. In fact, it's causing problems. So no matter what I say about, my design techniques and all of my errors, this still is way preferred than over this. And look, this is a system here. This is really helping a lot of wildlife that never did, previously that was non-existent, and which is still non-existent here. So just want to add that context here. By 2015, I'm starting to learn a little bit more and course correcting. So what I did was I thinned out, moved or removed aggressive species, mostly those asters and goldenrods. Sometimes some of the rosin weed got out of hand as well. So I'm in the editing stage, and a lot of friends of mine who do a lot of native gardening, they feel like, oh, basically I'm just an editor. And I agree. I mean, if you don't do it right, you want to do a good design from the beginning and not have to be this editor for so many years. But that's that's where I'm at with this situation. So I'm doing a lot of editing. I added some successional species, mainly for earlier season blooms. So there's interest throughout the growing season. I'm adjusting the plant height and the spacing to have it kind of shorter plants up front, medium plants in the center, and then towards the back. This is very important for, as I mentioned in the goals, I want to have a natural screen because, I want a buffer from that road. When I sit back here in my lawn chair, I want it to be peaceful. So this is pretty awesome. So this is successful back here. This is a musclewood tree that grew really well in this situation. But even leading up to that, I got cut plant, I got tall coreopsis. Even beyond that musclewood, I've got a hedge of aronia, black chokeberry. So the hedge is the buffer is performing quite well. I'm clumping plants together instead of just having a mishmash, and cleaning up the path edges, which is super important. I love when it's possible, I love to add paths because I think it's important to be able to move through a garden so you can experience the garden within it instead of, standing on the sidelines. But you want those paths to be clear. And I've included structural layer, and that's what I was talking about back here. 2018, this is looking good. This is now the goal. I think I'm accomplishing those goals that I set up. Look at the path. I like how this path snakes through, and you want the path to kind of end in somewhat of have it like beckon you to enter the path, and then have it to be a bit of a mystery of where it's going to go. And this is perfect. Once you get back here, it goes under, you go through a trellis that I covered in Virgin's Bower, and then it opens up into this woodland back here. So I thought that was very successful. On the right shows you the biodiversity I have in this garden. It's a small garden, but man, there's a lot packed into that. Look at that. Rudbeckia, Baptisia, Hoary vervain, Monarda fistulosa, Echinacea. A lot going on here. This is a better example of how everything, the structure is leading up to that hedge, that screen. Culver's root, such a fantastic plant if you can make it work in your garden. It combines with other flowers just great because it's such an interesting contrast. There aren't many other flowers that have that candelabra kind of look. Again, all this diversity. Adding some spring plants finally. Now I go crazy with the Geum triflorum, the prairie smoke. I absolutely love this plant, not only because obviously the bloom is just absolutely incredible. It looks completely psychedelic to me. But after it blooms, and it has that super cool seed head, what I'm more interested in is how the foliage, it's a really interesting foliage, and it's evergreen. So it works great as an edging plant. Added some boulders as like a structure for the very short corner of the garden. So, you know, I'm talking a lot about aesthetics, and the reason why I'm talking about is aesthetics is like that, those last 3 bullet points that I mentioned in the goals of like, I want these gardens to continue, you know, yes, of course, we want them to be ecologically functional, but we want them to last for more than, you know, a couple years. So, but really, the reason why I'm doing any of this is for this connection, this, relationship that these plants have with the fauna of these natural communities. This evolution has been working its way to this point for thousands of years, you know. So it's a super important relationship that this planet needs. The problem is that it's getting so fragmented. It's a lot of it's just getting wiped off the planet, and like Doug Ptolemy says, you know, you can't rely on nature preserves or national parks to do the supporting, because there's just not, we don't have that space anymore. In fact, what happens, we end up losing some. So you always hear about all the habitat that we lose. So we need to add it into our own yards. And if you build it, they will come. And that's the most fascinating thing about doing this kind of work, is to be able to observe these relationships that happen. You know, I just think this is sublime. It never gets old. I'm always amazed that, you know, I think, damn, I planted this and this guy found it. And I think it's just miraculous. This is cool. I think it's important to add plants that attract predatory insects, because they will keep your pest insects at bay, really. And this is my favorite insect, is the great black wasp. And if you have a rattlesnake master in your yard, you've seen these guys. I think they also like the pycnanthiums as well. They look super frightening, but they are a solitary species. They are not from a colony, so they are not aggressive. They don't have a colony to defend. So you could get right up there and observe them. They're super cool. Can't remember the name of this guy, but he's just as menacing looking, but just as passive as well. Finches love the silphiums, the sunflowers, the echinacea. When these silphiums go to seed in this garden, I felt like I was getting dive bombed by finches. It's really cool. Now they do this in my yard, but it happens more with the Western sunflower. They love that plant. This is great. I spotted this. These are baby cedar waxwings that were on my pagoda dogwood in the woodland section of the yard. And I just think this is cool because, you know, if I didn't plant this garden, there's no reason why they would be there, you know. There's nesting potential here. There's foraging potential. That's why they're there, because, you know, we're planting these gardens, and that's the importance of this work. Culver's root looks super cool even at night under the Chicago city street lamps. Okay, so now we're getting into the point. I'll get pretty. How far in this? I need to move it along. So if I were to do this all over today, if I were hired to take on this job, what would I do differently? And let's start with the prep. I'll just move quickly. Number one, minimize soil disturbance. Absolutely key. Don't do too much shifting of that soil. A lot of people use what's that, those sod cutters, but I don't believe in that. I think that just opens up the soil. Absolutely no rototilling. That's just the most violent way to remove soil. A good technique is a smothering technique using cardboard. It's not my preferred method, only because I do a lot of gardens. You know, I do about over 30 a year, and if you use a smothering technique, you have to wait a season. But I don't have time to wait, so I use a heavily diluted glyphosate application. You spray that late in the evening when there isn't any wind. The molecules bind with the soil, and bacteria immediately begin breaking down the chemistry. Safe to plant within 2 weeks after application. That's what the instructions say, but most land managers would tell you it's safe after just 2 or 3 days. No need for soil disturbance, just plant directly in the dead vegetation, which can be used as mulch. I would use less mulch, one-time application of 2 inches of hardwood shredded mulch spread over the dead vegetation, and less irrigation. Very important. It's if actually you want to kind of lean on the less side than more for sure, because these plants can handle being stressed a bit, and they really should. I learned that from Chad at Hidden Savannah. I always think, man, Chad, I think you need to water these plug trays. And he's like, you sound like my mom, let it be, they'll be fine. So he knows to let it stress a bit, because that's how they're gonna get their strong roots. If they are coddled and they're babied, then they're not going to grow that, because they're just going to be waiting for you to be spoon feeding them water. So I think a really great tool is to get a rain gauge. And so after you do all the planting, set out that rain gauge, use one of those oscillating sprinklers that kind of go like that. And once that rain gauge makes it to 1 inch, if you're planting in the spring or the fall in the cool season, then you stop. If it's in the dry season, it's very dry, I let it go to 2 inches. And then after that, you do the same for about every 4 to 6 days after that. After about 5 to 7 weeks, you could cut back on the watering. And then after 2 years, this should be a drought tolerant landscape. You should be able to just not even worry about watering. How would I design this yard if I were to do it today? I would simplify and balance. Use less species, but more of them. Don't be stingy, 1 foot centers, 18-inch centers at the most. You want to really fill in that garden early on, because that's going to get it closer to a self-sustaining community, and to, should I say, like, so it gets to, you don't want it to be in constant development stage by like slowly adding plants. You want to get the plants in kind of early on. So that's why you want to come up with a pretty good design from the get-go to get it up and running. I'm all about shorter species these days, especially in front yards. I think that's going to be the key to having these gardens be accepted with neighbors. Use shorter species that have a very good succession of blooming time from April into fall. So the exception to the shorter species is the structural layer, like I mentioned before, with the skyline idea, but also in this specific situation is the buffer. I want really tall plants that are very heavy. So that is a specific use for those kinds of plants. Balance out the seasonal layer, so there's something interesting throughout the growing season. Increase the ground layer, super important. Can't emphasize that enough. And add rhythm. Have some rhythm to it within the design. Repeating elements, nice flow. Super important. Okay, so I redesigned this yard. So first I want to talk about, what did I keep? Not much. I love the path. I thought that was a perfect path. That was great. The musclewood was amazing. Keep that in there. The hedge that I had here was the Aronia. I'm going to change it up, and I'm going to put 9-bark in here, because 9-bark is even thicker than black chokeberry, and it's going to be, create a whole green wall, and that's what I want right here. Red osier dogwood over here, just because I love it. It looks great, and this time of year in the snow, those red stems up against the snow is gorgeous. Just beware that every few years you need to coppice those babies down pretty much all the way to the ground, because you get that bright red growth only on new growth, actually. So there's a little bit of pruning technique when it comes to red osier dogwood. So what I do, I have this design, and then I'm in the field and I'm starting to put in these plants. I put in the structural layer first, put in these understory trees, the shrubs, move on to the taller plants, the rattlesnake master, wild quinine, Culver's root, put those in, and then I start working on the seasonal layers. A lot of these plants are doing dual function. The rattlesnake master, quinine, Culver's root could also be considered the seasonal layer as well, because I like to I like to combine have combinations of plants within drifts. Because there's not going to be one plant that's going to be in bloom for 3 months. Very rare do you find that. So I want to have plants that will succeed one another. So something is blooming and then it's starting to go to seed, and then another one's going to take over. Maybe there's kind of an overlap, and that's what I'm thinking about frequently. Like right here, let's start off with the edge, the shortest of the plants. This combination against the sidewalk and the driveway, field pussy toes and prairie smoke, combining those because I want to give myself some space to get out of the car and not have to wrestle with some flopping plants. That's going to do it for me. In fact, pussy nose and prairie smoke can handle even a little bit of very light foot traffic. From there, taller plant, a little bit taller than that, or the wild petunia and the purple prairie clover. It's a great combination. Have it drift through into here, and then it's going to kind of intermingle with this second drift, which is going to be slightly taller plants, combination of rattlesnake master and purple coneflower. All the while, I have prairie dropseed mixed throughout. That's going to serve as the base layer, warm season base layer, but also seasonal interest as well. Just an elegant plant for this kind of situation. I'm surprised more people don't use it. I have no idea why. I think, the downside to it is that if you don't have full sun, it just kind of flops and looks kind of limp. So make sure you have full sun. Otherwise, it really won't get to that flowering, that beautiful flowering stage. Also, they take a while to get established, 2 to 3 years. So I know some designers end up going with Sidehot's grama instead, because that you're going to have instant gratification in that first year. I don't really like using Sidehot's grama for small yards because I think it's a little too tall. So prairie dropseed's my go-to. Just have patience, man. And then the theme, the kind of like the most prevalent plant in this, the dominant plant of this garden is going to be wild petunia. I mixed it here with the purple prairie clover. I'm mixing it here with the early season combo of spiderwort and penstemon digitalis. I'm mixing it here with these taller, with the quinine and the prairie blazing star. It repeats here. So you need that repetition to get the rhythm going, right? So that is going to be the dominant plant. I like its color. I like its form. It blooms for a very long time. It will also double not only as a seasonal interest, but also as a ground layer, because they kind of seed like crazy as well. But I think it's a good thing. Some people have a problem with them reseeding a little bit too much, but if you have a very good base layer, and that's what the green is, all the green in the back is the base layer of Carex abernia. It's a sedge. I don't know the common name of that sedge, but it's really short. And that's the fibrous root system that I've been talking about. The prairie dropseeds, the fibrous root as well. So if you have that in there, that's going to hold back some of these kind of more aggressive plants. So there's going to be a balance. There's going to be a natural balance eventually. What I am kind of plopping in here and there is Phlox pilosa for early seasonal interest all throughout, pretty much throughout the whole bed. The asters and the goldenrods, amazing combination, yellow and purple. But where I had it before, right up front, put them in the back. They'll do well back here, and then you'll have very important nectar sources for fall pollinators. All right. Oh, I want to talk quickly about this little tiny sliver here where it was lawn, and then I put in those tall plants that fell all over the sidewalk and the driveway. Well, instead, let's simplify. Very short alternate combo of prairie dropseed and nodding onion. Sprinkle some Liatris spicata in here for some colorful interest. Bam, that's it. Let's just go with that. I think that would look really well and serve that purpose, and you'll still have your space to walk and to park the car. Oh, one other thing I added was a lateral path here, and that's mainly utility purpose for the postal carrier. I always think about the postal carrier. Where do they walk? And I gave the postal carrier space to walk in between my yard to get to the neighbor's yard. Underneath the musclewood, you're not gonna, it's gonna be pretty shady, so I'm throwing in a half plug tray of wild geranium and a half plug tray of wild columbine. I think that'll be a great combination back in through there. Both of those plants can handle shade, but it can, you know, if there's some sun in there, they can handle that as well. So that's about it. I just want to scroll through some photos really quickly of what's beyond the prairie area in the shaded area. This is underneath 3 catalpa trees, so it's pretty shady. This is when this is August 2004, before we got into knowing what to do with native plants back here. And this is May 2019. Left some lawn so you could still hang out here. I have a path that you can't really see because these geraniums just go gangbusters in here in the spring and look just gorgeous. This pagoda dogwood is just a fantastic tree. September 04 and June 2006, August 2006, May 2015. There's that, all those explosion of geraniums. The pagoda dogwood in flower, just gorgeous. Here's the pagoda dogwood in its fall color. My son's showing off the mayapple flower underneath the umbrellas there. So after you walk through the prairie section, you pass through this trellis, this gate that is covered in virgin's bower, and then it opens up into that, and that's how that path moves. So it's a path with a specific utility, but also has a really cool design element as well, because it breaks up that big biomass and then it separates that prairie area into quadrants instead of just trying to deal with designing just one massive area. Wild senna in here, as well as with the maculatum, or I'm not entirely sure what Joe Pye weed, that's probably purpurea. So yeah, this is where we hang out. So it's a really peaceful setting back here underneath these shade of the catalpa, and we're closed off by that natural screen. This is kind of funny that I call this the rogue garden because this is behind our house. It's actually Chicago Park District land. But I made this rogue garden and I banished the plants that weren't behaving well in the front yard, that were a little too aggressive, like woodland sunflower and Virginia waterleaf. I put them back here and I let them go crazy. And that's a perfect situation for them. And the birds love it and bees love it. And all the people in the park love this little tiny garden back here. Oh, all right, that's it. So that's all I got.
Oh, thank you so much. And, I have to say that I went through the same thing with my yard, and, just a lot of things I put in and I wound up taking them out. Of a very small yard here in Lansing, and I wanted, I kind of wanted a little bit of everything. Which is,
Yeah.
with native plants and going to nurseries, it's so easy to do. I put in rosinweed. I took out rosinweed because it just seeds far too much. Ironweed. I love it. Love that purple in the, that late summer. But again, it seeds all over the place. So I learned trial and error, and, just, you did the same. And, there's, I think, back when we kind of started all of it, there wasn't really a guide for it all. And really, it is a trial and error. And now I do, native plant consulting and design and installation on, besides my fun job. And, I learned from my own yard.
Absolutely.
I
Yes.
know it works, especially urban environments. So that's kind of where my focus has been, our urban environments. So, yep, exactly. I have been in your shoes.
We all have, right?
Yep. So
Yeah.
we had a couple of questions.
Right.
Let's see. One of them is, can you use short herbaceous plants or ground covers in the same way as sedges and grasses? How do we determine the root depth of appropriate plants to provide support?
Yeah, I use sprawling plants. I like to add a diversity of base layer. So I do the sedges. I like to add, the cool season sedges, cool season grasses, warm season grasses. Also, and then the sprawling forbs. So it's a little tricky in full sun conditions. Because there aren't a lot of options that are available in the nursery trade. I use sometimes I use wild strawberry if the situation works well. And I also like to use Paccara, that's ragwort. So in full sun, that's Paccara platensis. That's called prairie ragwort, which is an interesting plant. So I'm always on the lookout for more. Chad and I were in a savanna in Northwest Indiana this past fall, and we're kind of blown away by the ground cover in this one area where it had oh gosh, what's the name of it? I can't think of it. Robin's plantain. That's
Oh,
a really,
yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. That was the first time I ever seen it in the wild, and that's, there's possibilities with that. Yeah. And like I said, sometimes, wild petunia can work in that situation. But I think it's good to have really important to have cool season coverage, because that's really what's gonna provide the weed barrier early on.
Yep, exactly. And this is from Mitch. Can you talk a little
Oh
bit
boy.
more? Yeah, I know. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between seasonal and structural plants? Structural are more robust, taller, resistant to decay, length of bloom time. Any plants that you consider to be in both categories?
Yeah, I definitely. I think of rattlesnake master is usually it's been my go-to for the structural layer, but I like to I clump 3 of those together. You don't really have to. It depends on the size of the yard, and so that will, I mean, up until this crazy snowstorm, my rattlesnake master was still upright and stiff. So a great time of year to see, to find out what's a good structural plan is this time of year. What is left standing, and how does it look interesting? So Culver's root can work in both situations seasonally. Same with wild quinine. I'm experimenting this year with some new ones. Sanguisorba
Oh, yeah.
canadensis. Yeah, I've seen that one in very fancy gardens, the Lurie Garden in Chicago, and I know it's a native, and I've seen it in the wild, but in wetlands, and I'm like, this is such a cool plant, but there's no way I could get away with it. And then I talked to a woman who works with the Lurie Garden. She's like, we do not add any water to it. It can handle it. So I'm starting to figure out which plants you could kind of push their limit,
Mhm.
Another one that I'm gonna mess around with this year is the meadow rue, the purple meadow rue is
Okay.
really beautiful structural plant. Could work, I think, in certain situations as well. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think of, if it's a small garden and you're working, that's a thing with Kalamazoo, you probably with you guys, I'm not entirely sure about Lansing, but the soil is so thin that we get a chance to work with really short growing plants, which is pretty cool. So, and if most of your plants are only like 2 feet tall at the most, a structural plant could be echinacea, and those look really great in the wintertime. So I think of, Echinacea pallida could be considered a structural plant. I know Chad would slap me when I say this, but when I put pallida and purpurea together, doesn't, they come from two different habitats, but again, like this is gardening, so I'm trying to see what could, the limits, how far I can push that. And I think that's kind of a really cool combo, because the pallida blooms earlier, and as it's kind of fading away, the purpurea comes up and takes off from there. So
Yeah, I've done the same thing. I've got mine fairly close together, and I just love the different structure of of the flower shape. So
yeah,
as pallida, they droop down, and then purpurea is more out kind of almost horizontal, and yeah, they do absolutely fantastic together.
yeah.
Um,
The other thing, one last thing I want to say about the structural layer, they say it's kind of important to be able to see through it. So you don't want a tall, it's not just any tall plant, right? You want a plant that it doesn't have, the stalk isn't covered in really thick leaves. So it's going to be kind of transparent. So it still has that silhouette, but it's not going to just be a big mass. Like we're trying to get away from too many big, massive plants, right? Like
right.
senna is tall, but that's not going to be a structural plant. You want to be able to see the shape, and it's going to have like a really distinct architectural shape. Yeah.
Um, let's see. Any advice about adding support plants like grasses to established gardens? Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, that's all I talked about.
I know. I know, after
And
watching
over
yours, I
again.
think
Yeah,
I need to plug a little more prairie dropseed in my front yard.
that's a great one. It's so great.
Yep.
It's so great that even the non-native people are using it like gangbusters now. You go to some of these fancy gardens and you'll see, they're only about 10% of their plant list is native, but it's definitely going to have prairie dropseed
Oh
because they
yes.
beauty.
Yep, I've
Yeah.
started to notice that as well. Yeah, it's starting at least we're slowly getting that into those, proper gardens, so to speak.
Yeah, they're slow to conversion, that's for sure, and
They
they'll
are.
admit it.
Yep. I completely understand.
Yeah.
Somebody's asked, describe how you weed by cutting.
Yeah, okay. So this is tricky because it's hard for me. I'm a neat freak, and I just want that out of there, and I have to resist. And again, I work a lot with Chad Houston at Hidden Savannah, and he's the one who says, he just smacks my knuckle at that. He's like, don't just use your clippers and clip it, because you're just going to keep creating the same problems. So I've finally succumbed to that. And so I got really great little hand clippers that are meant for like horticulture, and they're super sharp. And so I just cut at the base. Usually it depends on the weed though, right? So if it's like a biennial, or most of the weeds we deal with, especially in Kalamazoo, because it's so dry and sandy, it's just, they're just they're just like what's it called? I'm trying to think of the weeds now. I have a terrible memory of the name of weeds.
Chickweed?
Yeah, like chickweed and well, I don't have chickweed a lot here, although I have a really fantastic native field chickweed that is just that's a really
Oh,
cool garden.
yes, that one's nice.
Yeah, that's a beautiful one. But yeah, so a lot of those I clip it as close to the base as possible. And of course it's going to grow back. But um, you know, eventually that's just going to be in the first year where it's just going to, or first and second year, it's going to kind of drive you mad, right? But really try to resist, because if you planted heavy enough, which you should, your native plants are going to outcompete those biennial and annual weeds. Now, if it's something really nasty, yeah, you're going to have to deal with. You can't just clip, and that all depends on what weed we're talking about. But the vast majority of weeds can just be clipped.
Yeah, I always go back to garlic mustard because everybody wants to pull it out.
Yeah.
And yet, as you pull it, and I understand, completely get it. But as you pull it out, you're pulling that seed bank right up to the top. And if it's a small bunch, I just clip all the flowers off.
Absolutely.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
its final year.
Yeah.
And I'm not disturbing the soil. Now, if it's a infestation, I get it.
Mhm.
But you're gonna fight it for a while. That is for sure.
Right. Yeah.
All right, let's see. I've been trying to plant small areas of natives each year in my large suburban yard to replace the lawn, but no plan. It's looking weird. Any suggestions?
Hmm. Yeah. I still get intimidated by big, vast areas of lawn. Like, okay, where do we start? Because I'll admit, I'm new to seeding, and I haven't really done many seeding projects. In fact, I just did some frost seeding with the help of Mitch here. He gave me some instructions. But I work with plugs for the most part. And so I think it's best to start off with, don't try to tackle it all in one fell swoop. Like you said, you're using smaller areas. So start off with small areas, but have a kind of an overall idea of what eventually you're going to get around to. So kind of like I think it's best to draw it out. I never used to draw out designs until I had to with this job. I needed to have a plan for customers, and so they could see what I'm going to be doing. So yeah, it's best to draw it out, or and just kind of work within each bed, but make sure, like, when you work on one bed, like really work on that bed, like really fill it, right? Don't don't like have like 4 or 5 beds prepped, but only buy enough plants for just one bed, but spread it throughout those 4 or 5 beds, right? So you're just those beds are going to be in a constant state of trying to get developed, and so they're never really going to catch on. So finish one bed before you move on to the other one, I think. But yeah, I think it's best to draw it out and have a bit of a plan to it, and think aesthetically as well. Yeah.
Let's see. Somebody was talking about, base layer, herbaceous, wild petunia. Oh, blue-eyed grass is another excellent one.
Oh yeah, that's the one.
Yep, I've got blue-eyed grass, Antonaria, other little sedges, spirabolus. What are your favorite choices to plant under dense-rooted shade trees like sugar maple?
Oh, that's tough. So I haven't really had a situation, believe it or not, where I've had to deal with heavy sugar maple, because we are here in oak savanna country. Although I've had a Norway maple to deal with, and if it's really heavy shade, um, I think Penn sedge can probably handle pretty much
Yes.
anything.
Oh, it will.
I'm having a hard time getting anything established underneath a bunch of hemlocks. And I just had a hemlock fall in my backyard a couple days ago during that storm. And now I know why, because the root systems are so shallow that, they're just soaking up so much water. But anyways, so it depends on the tree. But I think in a maple situation, again, I think it's really important to go out into when it comes to remnant properties, there are a lot of remnants for what would that community be considered, like southern mesic
Yep.
uh,
Yes.
woodland.
Mhm.
And there's quite a few of those still
Mhm.
around. Not there a lot, not a ton, but a lot more than oak savannas and prairies. So you go in there, go in May and just take a look at what's growing and just observe the different
Yeah.
layers. One of my favorites, sedges, is Carex plantagenea, which is
Plantain sedge?
yeah,
Yes. Yep.
plantain sedge. Sometimes in those beech maple forests, there's like huge colonies of that mixed in with various sedges. There's quite a few sedges that would work in that situation. Another great one that I would love to use, bromoides. They
Mhm.
call it the prairie dropseed of the woods.
Yes.
Has that beautiful look. So the bromoides, Sprengelii works really well. I think a really cool diversity of sedges would be really cool underneath a sugar maple. And then you could throw in some spring ephemerals,
Yep.
those
I
are
was just
expensive plants.
I was
And
just gonna say that.
yeah, throw those in. And if you have terrible deer pressure, then throw in some ferns as well. But, some ferns that will not outcompete, like marginal wood fern would do well. Lady fern would be really nice. A Christmas fern, perfect. A diversity of ferns and sedges is what I go with in that situation, especially if there's a heavy deer pressure.
Here's a good one. I get this quite a bit. Any tips for planting near under black walnut trees?
Oh man, I don't really know too much about this because I haven't had to do it. And I've heard so many people talking about it. And it's funny, it's like, man, I only learn something if I need to, to do something with it. Like, I guess I'll deal with that problem when I come to it. And I haven't had to deal with that problem yet. I'm not entirely sure, although I've heard that if you go on the Prairie Moon website, there's a filter specifically
Yes.
for that purpose, for what you can plant underneath black walnuts. So I don't listen to me, listen to them. I don't
Yep.
really know what I'm talking about.
I completely get it. Well, I think we've got all the questions.
Great.
Well, Mike, thank you so, so much. I'm glad to hear that, we were on that same path of what I should have done, what I did, and how to do it differently for the next person. So yeah, I had exactly the same experience. I was gung ho about putting all these things in. And then the
Yeah.
following year, the year after, I'm ripping them out and putting them in somebody else's bigger yard that can handle it.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, I'm guilty of, be careful with your enthusiasm.
I know. I learned. I was so excited,
Yeah.
to get rid of the lawn and put in native plants. And then I thought, oh, what I do? But again, it's important, especially in urban, city areas. You've got to keep the visibility. And I just say short guys in front, and then you can kind of do those medium height, and then, back further, then you can put in that prairie dock and the rosin weed, which, I put in because I absolutely love them. Those are sort of my big focal point plants that, it's a conversation piece when people walk by and they love
Absolutely.
it. And
Yeah,
That's, you listed all the reasons why to do it, and we all, you don't have to be like some of us who take all the lawn out, but small areas can make a big difference for our native pollinators, especially the native bees that don't fly very far. So,
absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point.
yep.
Yeah, the foraging, if, if
Mhm.
they create a habit, you create the habitat and they'll have a nest and they need that foraging as close as possible. And that's another reason
Exactly.
why you want to clump species together. A lot of people think that's just for aesthetic purpose, but if you go into a prairie, you'll see plants clumped together like that. And the reasoning for that is those native bees, they don't like long commutes.
No.
So they will they are short, short distance
Yeah,
flyers.
they don't, yep, exactly. They don't go very far. And if we can all put little pockets in the yards, and they've got a, floral resource to, to get them moving around a little bit. And, like I think I did my yard 2017, and watching the diversity every single year is exciting.
It sure is.
Yep, I'll go, I'll be outside and I'll go busting back into the house, and my wife's like, "What's out there?" And I'm like, "It's a new bee species. I got to get my camera."
Yeah,
And
I know. It's so exciting.
it is.
It's cool.
Yep.
Yep. They'll turn anyone into an ecologist.
Exactly.
Or amateur.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, thank you so much. And I'm sure I'll see you at Hidden Savannah this summer. So,
I'll be there. I'll be there.
all right,
Okay.
sounds good.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. And we recorded this, so we'll get it up on our website. So if you've got, you can take a look at more, re-listen and learn it again and take more notes. So thank you, everyone, and have a good evening and stay warm.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Good night, Mike.
All right. Take care.
You too.